Before I begin my pre-trip, I'm going to let my examiner know that the keys are in my pocket. As I'm walking up to the truck, I'm going to check the ground for any leaks, such as oil or coolant. I'm going to check that the truck is level. I'm looking for low tires, broken spring, or an unbalanced load. I'm going to check my hood mirrors and mirror mounts, make sure they're secure, not cracked, and all bolts are in place. I'm going to check all my lights, high beams, low beams, left and right turn signals, four-way flashers, and reflectors. I'm going to make sure they are clean and working. I'm going to check my clearance lights, make sure they are amber in color and working. I'm going to check my windshield, that is clean and has no cracks. Now I'm going to raise the hood. I'm going to shout clear while doing this. Then I'm going to walk to the right side of the engine. I'm going to check the coolant level, make sure it is full and not contaminated, and the cap is secure. The reservoir is secure, and there's no missing bolts and no leaks. I'm going to check the hoses for cuts or leaks, and the hose clamps, that they are tight and secure. I'm going to check the exhaust system, make sure the clamps are tight, and there's no soot or rust indicating a leak. I'm going to check all remaining hoses and clamps for leaks, cuts, or dry rot. Then I'm going to check the alternator, make sure it is secure, there's no missing bolts, and no frayed or burnt wires. I'm going to check the alternator belt, make sure there's no cuts, frays, or signs of wear, that the belt is snug at 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch deflection. Then I'm going to check the water pump, make sure it is secure, no loose or missing bolts, and I'm going to say if it's gear or belt driven. If it's belt driven, I'm going to check the belt has no cuts, frays, or signs of wear, and the belt is snug at 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch deflection. Then I'm going to check all hoses from the water pump, make sure they are secure, have no leaks, cuts, or dry rot. Now I'm going to walk to the left side of the engine. I'm going to check the oil fill cap, make sure it is on and secure. Then I'm going to check the oil level, make sure it is full and there's no contaminants. Then I'm going to check the air compressor, make sure it is secure, there's no missing bolts, no leaks, and I'm going to say if it is gear or belt driven. If it is belt driven, I'm going to check the belt for cuts, frays, or signs of wear, and make sure the belt is snug at 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch deflection. Then I'm going to check the hoses to the power steering pump, make sure they are secure, and there's no cuts, leaks, or dry rot. Then I'm going to check the power steering pump, make sure it is secure, there's no missing bolts, no leaks. I'm going to say if it is belt or gear driven. If it is belt driven, I'm going to check the belt for cuts, frays, or signs of wear, and make sure the belt is snug at 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch deflection. Then I'm going to check the steering shaft, make sure it is not bent, there's no cracks or illegal welds. Then I'm going to check the lower and upper U-joints, make sure they are lubricated and there is no excess play. Then I'm going to check the steering box, make sure it is secure, there's no missing bolts or leaks. Then I'm going to check the hoses from the steering box to the pump for leaks, cuts, or dry rot. Then I'm going to check the power steering reservoir, make sure it is secure, full, and not contaminated. Now I'm going to look at the steering linkage. I'm going to check the pitman arm, the drag link, the steering knuckle, and steering arm. Make sure there's nothing bent, cracked, or damaged, and there are no illegal welds. I'm going to check all the castle nuts, make sure they are not loose, and all the cotter pins are in place. Then I'm going to check the tie rod and tie rod ends, make sure there's nothing bent, cracked, or damaged, and there are no illegal welds. Now I'm going to check the front suspension. I'm going to check the front spring mount, the rear spring mount, and the shackle. Make sure they are secure, there are no missing nuts or bolts, they are not cracked or broken, and there are no illegal welds. Then I'm going to check the leaf springs, make sure they are not cracked, shifted, or missing. And I'm going to check the U-bolts, that they are tight and secure and there are no shifting. Then I'm going to check the shock, that is secure, there are no missing nuts or bolts, or oil indicating a blown shock. Now I'm going to look at the front air brakes. I'm going to check that the airline is secure and there are no cuts or leaks. Then I'm going to check the brake chamber, make sure it is secure, there are no cracks, leaks, or dents. Then I'm going to check the slack adjuster and push rod. With the brakes released, it should have no more than 1 inch of movement when pulled on. I'm going to make sure there are no missing cotter pins. Then I'm going to check the brake drum for heat cracks, discoloration, or fluid in the drum, and make sure there are no missing parts. Then I'm going to check the brake lining for cracks or fluid and make sure it has a minimum of 1/4 inch of thickness. Some trucks have disc brakes. If they have disc brakes, I'll check the caliper, the disc, and the pads. Now I'm going to look at the front tires. I'm going to check the inside and outside sidewall of the tire for cuts or bulges. Then I'm going to make sure it has a minimum of 4/32 inch of tread depth, and I would check that with a depth gauge. Then I'm going to check the tire pressure, make sure it is at 100 psi, and I'd check that with a tire pressure gauge. Then I'm going to check the inner and outer rim for cracks or welds. Then I'm going to check my lug nuts, make sure they are tight and there are none missing, and there are no signs of rust or black streaks indicating looseness. Then I'm going to check my hub, make sure it is full of oil and the hub seals are not leaking. Then I'm going to check my valve stem that is capped and not touching the rim. Now I'm going to close the hood. I will shout clear while doing this. Now I'm going to look at the driver's side of the tractor. I'm going to check the turn signal and 4-way flasher and reflector that is clean, working, and amber in color. Then I'm going to check my mirror mounts, that they are secure and there are no damage and no missing bolts. Then I'm going to check my mirrors, make sure they're secure, not cracked or broken. Then I'm going to check my door hinges, they are not binding and the door swings freely. Then I'm going to check the door latch and make sure it works properly. Then I'm going to check the footsteps, make sure they are clean, no missing bolts, and no obstructions. Then I'm going to check the fuel tank, make sure it has no leaks, it's not cracked, dented, or damaged. Then I'm going to check the fuel tank mounting brackets, make sure they are not cracked, and there are no missing nuts or bolts. Then I'm going to check the fuel tank straps, make sure they are secure, and have a rubber seal so there is no metal to metal contact. Then I'm going to check the fuel cap, make sure it has a gasket. Then I'm going to check the fuel level, make sure it is full and not contaminated. Then I'm going to check the DEF tank straps, make sure they are secure and there are no missing bolts and the cap is tight and the tank is not leaking. Then I'm going to check the storage compartment hinges, make sure they are not binding and it latches properly. Then I'm going to check for a fully charged fire extinguisher and make sure it is securely mounted. Then I'm going to check for 3 reflective triangles and spare fuses. I will periodically check the battery connections, make sure they are tight, there is no corrosion, and the batteries are secure. Then I'm going to check the battery box and cover to make sure it is secure. Then I'm going to check the catwalk, make sure it is secure, there are no missing bolts, it is clean, and there are no obstructions. Then I'm going to check the exhaust stack, make sure it is secure, there are no missing bolts, and no soot or rust indicating a leak. Then I'm going to check the frame and cross members, make sure there are no welds, missing bolts, cracks, or damage. Then I'm going to check the drive shaft, make sure it is not bent or damaged, and the U-joints are tight, lubricated, and there are no missing bolts or excessive play. Then I'm going to check the electrical line plugged into the tractor with the safety latch down and there are no cuts. Then I'm going to check the air lines out of the tractor, make sure there are no signs of leaks or damage. Then I'm going to check the air lines to trailer, make sure it is not leaking or damaged, and there is 3 inches minimum off the frame. Then I'm going to check the glad hands, make sure they are connected properly, there are no leaks, and I'm going to check the rubber grommets, make sure they are not rotted, cracked, or missing. Then I'm going to check the trailer electrical cord, make sure it is plugged in with the safety latch down, and there are no cuts. Then I'm going to check all over the front of the trailer for missing rivets, loose panels, or holes. If it has a header board, I'm going to make sure the header board is secure with no missing bolts or broke welds. Then I'm going to check the top front clearance lights on the trailer, make sure it is clean, working, and amber in color. Now I'm going to look at the fifth wheel components. I'm going to check the fifth wheel slider airline, make sure it is not crimped, cut, or leaking. Then I'm going to check the apron for cracks or broken welds. I'm going to make sure that there's no daylight between the apron and the fifth wheel skid plate. Then I'm going to check the fifth wheel skid plate, make sure it is properly lubricated. I'm going to make sure that the pivot pin is seated and the release arm is in with the safety latch down if it was equipped. Then I'm going to check the sliding fifth wheel locking pins, make sure they are locked and working. Then I'm going to check the mounting platform and sliding track, make sure there are no broken teeth, no broken welds or cracks, and there are no missing or loose mounting nuts or bolts. Then I'm going to check the fifth wheel locking jaws, make sure they are locked around the shank of the kingpin, and the kingpin is not cracked or bent. Now I'm going to look at the rear of the tractor. I'm going to check the main rear frame, make sure there are no missing bolts or cracks or illegal welds. Then I'm going to look at the left and right turn signals, the four-way flashers, the tail lights, the brake lights, and reflectors. They should be red in color, and the backup light should be clear. Make sure all are operational. I'm going to check my splash guards, make sure they are secure, and there are no more than 50% missing. I'm going to check that there is enough space between the tractor and landing gear so they will not hit. Now I'm going to check the front drive suspension. The type will vary per tractor. I'm going to check the spring mounts, make sure they are secure and there are no cracks or missing nuts or bolts. If there is an equalizer equipped, I'm going to check the mount, make sure it is secure and there are no missing nuts or bolts. Then I'm going to check the springs, make sure they are not cracked, missing, or shifted. If there is an equalizer equipped, I'm going to check the equalizer arm, that it's not broken and there are no missing bolts. Then I'm going to check the U-bolts, make sure they are tight and secure and there is no sign of shifting. Equalizers do not have U-bolts. Then I'm going to check the torsion bar, make sure it's secure, there are no missing nuts or bolts, and it is not bent. Then I'm going to check the shock absorber, make sure it's securely mounted, there are no missing nuts or bolts, and no oil indicating a blown shock. Then I'm going to check the upper and lower airbag mounts, make sure there are no missing nuts or bolts, the airbags are fully inflated and not cut, leaking, or rotted. Now I'm going to check my brakes. I'm going to check that the airline is secure and there is no cuts or leaking. Then I'm going to check my brake chamber, make sure it is securely mounted, there are no cracks, leaks, or dents. Then I'm going to check the slack adjuster and push rod. With the brakes released, it should have no more than 1 inch of movement when pulled on. And I'm going to check for any missing cotter pins. Then I'm going to check the brake drum, make sure there is no heat cracks, discoloration, or fluid in the drum, and make sure there are no missing parts. Then I'm going to check the brake lining, make sure there is no cracks, no fluid on it, and it has a minimum of 1/4 inch of thickness. Now I'm going to check the drive tires. I'm going to check the inside and outside sidewall of both tires for any cuts or bulges. Then I'm going to check that they have a minimum of 2/32 inch of tread depth, and I would check that with a tread depth gauge. Then I'm going to check the tire pressure, make sure it's at 100 psi, and I'd check that with the tire pressure gauge. Then I'm going to check the bud rims, make sure they are butted together and there's nothing stuck between them. Then I'm going to check the inner and outer rim, make sure there is no cracks, welds, or damage. Then I'm going to check the lug nuts, make sure they are tight, there is none missing, and there is no signs of rust or black streaks indicating looseness. Then I'm going to check the inner and outer axle sills, make sure they are not leaking and there is no missing parts. Then I'm going to check the valve stem, make sure it's capped and not touching the rim. Now I'm going to check the side of the trailer. I'm going to make sure that the frame is straight, looking down the side of the trailer. I'm going to check my sidewalls, make sure they are not bulging, there's no missing rivets or loose panels. If it is a flatbed, I'm going to check my tie-down ratchets and make sure there is no holes in the floor or loose boards. Then I'm going to check my reflectors and clearance lights, make sure they are secure, amber in color, and operational. Then I'm going to check my DOT tape, make sure it is present and secure and along the length of the trailer. Then I'm going to check my frame and cross supports, make sure they are not cracked or missing, are broken down the length of the trailer. Then I'm going to check that there is nothing hanging down and make sure there is no holes in the floor. Then I'm going to check that my landing gear is fully raised and my support pads are secure and in place. Then I'm going to check the landing gear support frame and cross supports. Make sure there is no broken welds, cracks, or damage, and there are no missing nuts or bolts. Then I'm going to check my crank handle. Make sure it is secure and in stowed position. As I'm walking alongside the trailer, I'm still checking my DOT tape, frame cross supports, and on flatbeds, I'm still checking my ratchet tie downs. As I get to the center of the trailer, I'm checking my turn signal, four-way flasher, marker, and clearance lights and reflectors. Make sure they are clean and operational and amber in color. Then I'm going to check my air lines. Make sure they're at least 12 inches off the ground and there is no leaks, cuts, or damage if visible. Then I'm going to check the sliding tandem axle track. Make sure there is no missing bolts or cracked welds. If there is no sliding track, mention that to the examiner. Then I'm going to check the sliding tandem locking pins. Make sure they are in place and locked. Then I'm going to check the sliding release arm. Make sure it is down with the safety pin in place if equipped. Now I'm going to look at the trailer axle. The parts depend on the trailer type. I'm going to check my spring mounts. Make sure they're secure, have no cracks or broken welds. If there is an equalizer equipped, I'm going to check my equalizer mounts, make sure they're secure and have no broken welds. Then I'm going to check my leaf springs, make sure they're not cracked, missing, damaged, or separated. If there is an equalizer equipped, I'm going to check the equalizer arm, make sure it's secure, has no missing nuts or bolts, and it's not cracked or broken. Then I'm going to check my U-bolts, make sure they are tight and secure. Then I'm going to check my torsion bar, make sure it's secure, has no missing bolts, and it's not bent. Then I'm going to check my shock absorber, make sure it's securely mounted, have no missing nuts or bolts, or oil indicating a blown shock. Then I'm going to check my upper and lower airbag mounts, make sure there's no missing nuts or bolts, and the airbags have no cracks or dry rot. Now I'm going to look at my trailer brakes. I'm going to check the airline, make sure it's secure and has no cuts or leaks. Then I'm going to check the brake chamber, make sure it's securely mounted with no cracks, leaks, or dents. Then I'm going to check my slack adjuster and push rod. With the brakes released and pulling on it, there should be no more than 1 inch of movement. Then I'm going to check that there's no missing cotter pin. Then I'm going to check the brake drum for heat cracks, discoloration, or fluid in the drum. Make sure there are no missing parts. Then I'm going to check the brake lining. Make sure there are no chunks missing, no cracks, and no fluid on it, and it should have a minimum of 1/4 inch of thickness. Now I'm going to check my trailer tires. I'm going to check the inner and outer sidewall of the tires for cuts or bulges. And I'm going to make sure it has a minimum of 2/32 inch of tread depth, and I check that with a tread depth gauge. Then I'm going to check my tire pressure and make sure it's at 100 psi. And I check that with a tire pressure gauge. Then I'm going to check the bud rims, make sure they are butted together and there's nothing stuck between them. Then I'm going to check my inner and outer rim for cracks or welds. Then I'm going to check my lug nuts, make sure they are tight and there is none missing and there is no signs of rust or black streaks indicating looseness. Then I'm going to check my hub, make sure it is full and the hub seals are not leaking, the inner or outer hub seals. Then I'm going to check my valve stem, make sure it's capped and not touching the rim. I'm still checking the frame and cross supports and DOT tape, and making sure that the splash guard is secure with no more than 50% missing, and the reflector and side lights are clean and operational in red in color. Now I'm going to look at the rear of the trailer. On the rear side of trailer, there should be an ABS light, if equipped, on the driver's side rear corner, and it's amber in color. Then I'm going to check my marker and clearance light. Make sure it's red in color, operational, not broken or missing. Then I'm going to check my clearance and marker lights. Make sure they're clean and operational and red in color. Then I'm going to check my left and right turn signals, my four-way flashers, my brake lights, and tail lights. They should be red in color and operational. Then I'm going to make sure my DOT tape is in place and secure. Then I'm going to check the bumper of the trailer, make sure it's secure, has no broken welds, missing nuts or bolts, and it's not damaged. For box trailers, I check the door hinges, make sure there are no missing bolts, and all the hinges and cotter pins are in place. Then I'm going to check that the door swings freely. If it is a roll-up door, I'd make sure it slides freely. There are no loose or missing nuts or bolts, and the cables are tight. Then I'm going to check that my door latch works properly, not binding, and has a good rubber seal around the door. These are possible extras to mention if present. I'd check the right side toolbox, make sure it's securely mounted. Then I'd check the door hinges, make sure there is no binding. Then I'd check that the latch works properly. Then I'd check the side trailer door hinges, make sure there are no cracks, missing nuts or bolts, and all hinges and cotter pins are in place, and that the door swings freely. Then I'd check that the latch works properly and the door has a good rubber seal. As I walk around to the other side of the trailer, I'm going to say that I would check everything on this side the same that I checked on the other side. Now I'm going to do my in-cab pre-trip. I'm going to check my seat belt, make sure it latches properly and it's not frayed. Then I'm going to check that my seat is secure to the floor. Then I'm going to check my air brake parking knobs, make sure they are set and secure with no leaks, and the gear shifter is in neutral. Then I'm going to check my floor, make sure it's clear of foreign objects. Then I'm going to check around the cab, make sure there are no obstructions. Then I'm going to make sure my mirrors are clean and adjusted to myself. Then I'm going to check the windshield, make sure it's clean, has no obstructions or unauthorized stickers. Then I'm going to check my city horn and my highway horn, make sure they are working, and you must honk. Now I'm going to conduct a safe start. With the clutch depressed before turning the key, I'm going to keep depressed until RPMs settle. Then I'm going to mention the ABS light as soon as I turn the keys on. They should come on and off. Then I'm going to check the oil pressure. It should rise to around 50 psi in 5 to 10 seconds. Then I'm going to check my voltmeter. Make sure it's not over or undercharging. Should be around 14 volts. Some trucks are digital. Then I'm going to check my water temperature gauge. It should climb as the engine warms. Then I'm going to check my DEF gauge. It should show the amount of DEF that's in the tank. Then I'm going to check my air gauges. They should show the amount of air in the systems. Then I'm going to check my left and right turn signal indicators, make sure they are working. Then I'm going to check my four-way flasher indicators, make sure they are working. Then I'm going to check my high beam indicators. The headlights must be on to check this. Then I'm going to check my wipers and washer, make sure they are operational, must turn on and off. Then I'm going to check my heater and defroster, make sure it's working, must turn on and off. You must know the following brake tests. It's important to say in order given. The entire test is completed in the lowest forward gear. First I'm going to start with my parking brake test for the tractor trailer. It's always first. With the tractor brakes applied, pulled out, and the trailer brakes released, pushed in. With the lowest forward gear, gently pull forward. The brakes should hold. If not, the brakes need adjustment. With the tractor brakes released, pushed in, and the trailer brakes applied, pulled out, in the lowest forward gear, gently pull forward. Brakes should hold. If not, brakes need adjustment. Now I'm going to move to the service brake test. In the lowest forward gear, with all brakes released, pushed in, pulling forward, apply the brake, stopping smoothly. There should be no pulling left or right. Now I'm going to do the final 3 steps. It is an auto fail if not done correctly. I'm going to do the air brake test. Say what you are testing for before you conduct it. Step number 1, the leak test. Check that all gauges are fully charged to governor cutoff at 120 to 125 psi. With the engine off and the key on and the lowest forward gear, release the red and yellow parking brakes. Fully apply service brakes and hold. Check air gauge in time for 1 minute. Should lose no more than 4 psi in 1 minute. Step number 2, checking the low air pressure warning system. Fan the service brake down to 55 psi or above. The low air pressure light and or alarm should come on. Step number 3, checking valves to pop. Continuing to fan service brakes down to approximately 40 psi, the knobs for air brakes should pop out, both tractor and trailer. State that this completes my air brake test. Restart truck to build pressure.